So, a few years ago, I, female 17 at the time, would attend community college at the outskirts of my hometown. I would take an hour and a half long bus ride because both of my parents worked and my other siblings were too young to drive. The outskirts of my town, despite being the literal outskirts, are more populated than you would expect with strip malls and apartment buildings. The bus would drop me off about 4 blocks from my university, which isn't too far. I always enjoyed those few minutes. Gave me time to disassociate. Anyway, this one time I left my phone at the library like a true idiot, using my brother's phone. I call a friend who worked at the school library during the late evening shift 7 to 9. And he said that he'd bring my phone to me, but he lived closer to the college than I did. So, I told him that I would just meet him at his shift and pick it up myself. He said, okay. And I boarded the bus around 6. Now I get off the bus at my usual spot, and the place looked deserted. I'd never been there that late at night. And maybe it was because it was a weekday that people were home, or I don't know. I had my brother's phone in my pocket, and I just clutched it tighter and tighter, picking up my speed until I was practically jogging. I'm nearing a corner when a flash of light goes off to my right. There in the shadows is a slimy, grimy-looking man. He's balding with a tourist shirt unbuttoned, halfway showing off his chest hair. He was wearing sunglasses at night, was wearing some gold jewelry, and was probably borderline morbidly obese. Just picture the word sleazy as a person. And most importantly, he had just taken a picture of me. In the instant that I saw the flash go off, I knew it was coming from his phone. Now, I think it's important to understand our positioning. He was pressed against a building to my right, right at the corner. I had to turn. I was about 10 feet away from him. To my left on the same side of the street was a car with blacked out windows and no license plates directly across the sidewalk from the man. The car was parked with the driver's seat facing me. So that was on the wrong side of the road because America drives on the right side, as opposed to the left. I had slowed down at that point as I began to debate my next move. Cross the street and continue walking, make a break for the school, turn 180 and leave my phone at the library, or approach the potentially dangerous man. I did the stupidest thing possible and approached the man. I'm not going to sit here and give you street advice, but maybe don't do what I did. I'm alive, but I definitely got lucky. Anyway, I demanded to know what he was doing. He looked taken aback. I could see his brain short-circuiting because this tiny young girl was red in the face, demanding to know what he was doing. He eventually sputtered about how he was just standing here. I said, "No, I saw you take that picture of me." His face fell. He started saying, no, he hadn't done that. Why would he want a picture of me? I had imagined it. I asked to see his gallery, which is extremely risky because who knows what I could have seen. He slowly pulls up his gallery, and as it's opening, I see a blurry picture of me in the distance. I didn't think I'd get that far. Granted, I had been running on adrenaline during our whole interaction, but this really made me pause. I told him to delete it. Then a door slammed shut. I knew it was the parked car. My brain cleared up and I hightailed it to the school. I could hear a single pair of footsteps behind me, but I sure as hell wasn't going to turn around and check who it was. The car started, but they would have had to do a U-turn on a relatively narrow street just to be able to follow me. I think that's what saved my life. The fact that the car was parked, facing the wrong direction. I reached the school out of breath. And in tears, my friend opened the building for me, and I was crying, explaining what had happened. He locked us in while we waited for the police, but the sleazy guy and his buddy were never found. Anyway, my mom had gotten out of work by that point, and I called her to ask to pick me up. We waited with my friend until the end of his shift and drove him home too. Needless to say, I carry mace with me everywhere I go now. And I am yet to find a police report stating a guy matching his description had been arrested. To be honest, I don't think the police believed me fully, but who knows? And to this day, I wonder what would have happened. If I hadn't confronted him, would I be here to write the story out? Or did I put myself in unnecessary danger by doing that? This incident takes place in Australia a few years ago. When a female, was about 19, I got a job at a hot dog shop with a phallic pun for a name in a somewhat shady area. The shop was pretty well known and had some fantastically dark local lore, rumors that the hot dogs were made out of horse meat, that the whole operation was a front for something less savory, or that we'd been closed by the health inspector and reopened illegally circulated, but people kept coming back for our delicious hot dogs. I soon discovered that none of that was even remotely true, but it was fun to gossip. And we'd often give customers ambiguous answers to fuel their wide-eyed morbid curiosities. I got used to the quirky characters that would come by pretty quickly, some older gentleman rumored to be involved with organized crime, the occasional nightclub owner tourists, and many homeless and mentally ill people who we would just provide food for too. The community was diverse and sometimes dangerous, but people looked after each other. One shift in the early hours of the morning, I was working the register. When a man comes in, he has long dark hair and thick, double covering. Most of the lower half of his face. The shop is busy, and he orders steps to the side and keeps chatting to me while other people order. I was used to this. In an area with a lot of nightlife, you get pretty comfortable with drunk ramblings and people hitting on you through slurred speech. I felt okay. As long as I was on the other side of the counter, about halfway through, after telling me his thoughts about all the other men in the shop being posers. But before he started telling me how beautiful I was, the man tells me that he is a chef at a nearby re. Like I said, people look after each other here. So, I was reassured, but I gave him a fake name just to be safe. I started seeing him often. It wasn't uncommon to have regulars some, even on a first-name basis. But when my coworkers told me that he had come looking for me, asking after me, when I wasn't there, I started to feel uneasy. Every time I saw him, he seemed to be more intoxicated than the last who would walk in and say,
"Hey, beautiful," or "Hey, pretty girl."
So casually as though it was really my name. It made me feel sick to my stomach every time. One night at 2 a.m. I finished my shift only to step out on the sidewalk and see him. On the other side of the road, waving at me coyly, I try not to think about how long he might have been there watching me through the shop's large neon sign, cluttered windows. My manager walked me to my car that night. Not too long after that. It was a Saturday night, and the shop was pumping. Anyone who has worked hospitality knows exactly what I'm talking about. There was a 40-minute wait for French fries. The tiny shop floor was crowded with people who had just rolled out of any one of the nearby nightclubs, drug, adult, and starving. The 3 a.m. rush. A big bulky man in his mid to late 20s started getting in my face. He had ordered French fries and had been waiting for 30 minutes. I kept apologizing, but that just made him more mad. I was desperately trying to plan an escape from my position against the back wall, behind the counter, to the front door, where I could get a nightclub bouncer's attention and have them come over and sort this guy out. There was no hope the store was too crowded. That's when I hear a sloppy but familiar voice.
Leave her alone.
My stalker emerges from the crowd, a mere 5. He fronts up against the massive man, and they start fighting. Luckily, the commotion did catch the eye of a bouncer, who ran in and swiftly de-escalated the situation. Shortly after that, I got a more stable job offer elsewhere and moved on, but to my hot dog shop stalker. Thanks, but no, thanks. I am from a small town, the kind where you are in the same class with the same kids from preschool through graduation. I was never popular and had my fair share of bullies, but never as bad as one kid in my class, Max. He was on the shorter side and had these little round glasses with his hair slicked to the side. Like he was right out of a movie cast as the stereotypical nerd. He kept to himself and didn't really interact with others if he could avoid it. Fast forward to 8th grade, when we were paired as lab partners and had to sit at the same table together every day for the entire year. I considered myself a nice person and always went out of my way to make sure I wasn't rude to people, especially people who hadn't done anything to deserve it. Of course, I was friendly and happy to be his partner, as long as he did his fair share of the work. The year came and went. He was shy, but polite, and we got along fine being partners. 9th grade started, and I had a lot of troubles at home with my birth father. So, I chose to move in with my mother, a few towns over. I was only about 30 minutes away, but I had to start a completely new school a month into my freshman year. And it was scary. I may not have been popular at my last school, but I did have several friends whom I loved and missed dearly. My mom would often drive me to the other town to see my friends and hang out. And I also started making new friends at my new school. It was a good setup. And I continued this way until I was 16 and could drive myself. I never heard anything from Max. And honestly, I had kind of forgotten about him. That was until my junior year of high school. I started casually seeing this other guy, Jack from my hometown, and he asked me to go with him to prom. I was excited and happy to say yes, as I would get to spend the night with him and my friends from childhood. A couple of months before prom, my mother told me there was a new lady at her job, and she was asking about me because her grandson was seeing me, and she wanted a picture so that she could put a face to my name. My mother knew Jack, and I knew this wasn't his grandmother. So she asked his name and wouldn't, it was Max. My mother showed her a picture of me that she had on her desk, and a lady went on her way. A few weeks later, she asked for the color of my prom dress so that she knew what to get Max so that we match. My mother was confused, but told her it was pink. About 2 weeks before prom, some of my friends from my hometown told me that Max had been telling people that we were going to the dance together and that he was so excited. I thought this was creepy, but I didn't put too much thought into it. The night of prom, I picked up Jack and we headed over to the school only to find Max and his grandmother waiting outside the entrance so that she could take pictures of us before we go in. I was not one to disappoint people. So, I politely took a couple of pictures with him as my actual date, stood off to the side and waited. If Max's grandmother was confused that I had another date, she didn't show it. The rest of the night went smoothly, and Jack and I had a great time. We didn't see Max anymore, and I assume he had left. Other than his grandmother telling my mom that he lost my number and trying to get it for him, which she thankfully didn't do. I didn't hear much from him until we graduated. I went to a state college, and I had heard that he had gotten to a well-respected private university. Everything was fine for the first few weeks of college. And then I ran into him. He caught me on the way to class one day. I was polite, and I asked him if he was a student here too, which he was, and I chatted with him for a minute before hurrying off to class. It was a relatively harmless interaction, but still creeped me out a bit since I knew he got into that other school and wonder why he chose to go to a state college for the next few months. I ran into him almost daily. He always wanted to talk, and he never seemed to be with anyone else. I found out from some girls in my dorm that he had been hanging around, asking about me and trying to figure out my class schedule and where I would be. And when he also told them that he was my boyfriend and he passed up a scholarship to another college to come here and be with me instead, they figured out he was lying when they never saw us together for long periods or him up in the rooms with me and stopped answering his questions. I left at the end of the semester to move home and take classes at a nearby school. I did not tell him obviously. The following year, I got married to my boyfriend for my senior year of high school. Dumb. I know. Anyway, we were in his small town, which is in the same county as my hometown, for a fair shortly after the wedding, while walking around and enjoying ourselves. I see Max staring at us at the end of the block. It was the first time I had been genuinely fearful of him, as the look on his face was nothing short of hatred. I tried to ignore him and went about my night, seeing him a few more times, always with that look on his face. The next few years passed with me, hearing nothing from him at all. I didn't even know if he still lived around the area or not. I found out a little while after that he did, when I started working at a clothing store in town, and he would stop by and sit in that dad chair next to the door for all the guys to hang out in while their people shopped. I mentioned it to my manager because of our history and the fact that he would stare at me constantly while sitting there. But he always came in with a girl. I later found out that it was his sister, so they didn't think too much of it. He never spoke to me, just stared. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved to a city in my home state, but still several hours away from my small town. I am 30 now and doing well in life other than a random Facebook friend request, which I rejected. I haven't heard from him. I hope it stays that way.